How am I the only one inside of this Roman Colosseum? This used to sit 15,000 people, but today it's just me. I'm a doctor of archaeology. Let me show you more about this theater, where we are, and the rest of the site. Along the way, I can give some tips and tricks about how we actually understand archaeological material and how that helps us understand what happened in the past. So let's get into it. I'm in Tunisia, a small country in northern Africa on the southern coast of the Mediterranean. For history nerds, it's best known as being home to Carthage, the famous adversary of Rome. After defeating Carthage, the Romans transformed the entire region into one of the richest parts of their empire. They built massive cities across Tunisia, each with their own amphitheaters, temples, and public spaces. While tourists flock to the ruins of Carthage and the UNESCO-protected hilltop city of Dougga, there are dozens of lesser-known Roman sites scattered across the country, one of which I'm at today. This is Uthina. Founded as a Roman colony during the reign of Augustus around 27 BCE, it grew into a thriving city. The archaeological site today covers about 100 hectares. That's 1 square kilometer, 1 million square feet, or nearly 250 football fields. At the site is not just the massive amphitheater, private homes covered in mosaics, a huge temple complex, a cistern complex, monumental baths, and a theater. Today, I'm trying to explore all of it, starting with the amphitheater. So an interesting fact about this amphitheater is because of the way that it was built, it is able to survive to this day. So if you look this way, you can see that the ground is like maybe a foot or two below this. But then you walk to the actual stage of the amphitheater, and this all survives. And that is because this was all covered up underground. The Romans built the stadium partially into a natural depression on top of a mamelon, a type of dome-shaped elevation feature. Over centuries, the cavea seated an area filled with soil and sand, looking like one large hill. Locals had thought it was a palace until a French diplomat named Jean-Baptiste Évariste Charles-Picot de Saint-Maury started excavations in 1873. He was able to remove all the soil, and lo and behold, inside was a very well-preserved Roman amphitheater. An inscription in the area commemorated a 350,000 sesterces donation during Hadrian's reign, which may have been related to his visit to the region in 128 CE. In elliptical shape, it is 112 meters long by 89 meters short with a total surface area of over 6,000 meters. In total, it could seat 15,000 spectators. This is a much better example of what it would have looked like when it was uncovered. The walkway running around the outside, they've added a floor here. And over there you see the original arch with some extra concrete. That is also still reconstruction, but kind of give you an idea. And the reality is most of these buildings, most of these Roman buildings, while they had these large blocks that are so imposing and are part of the reason they lasted a long time, they're mainly made with rubble on the inside. So you see across the way a really good demonstration of that. There's that first wall with large stones, the interior part of the wall that looks more like rubble, the gap, those really nicely hewn stones across there that are against that wall of more rubble-like fill that uses soil and clay to keep it together. And while the Romans really were able to build at a scale that was unique, this type of construction with nice wall on the outside, bad wall on the inside, is pretty much everywhere around the world. I mean, even in modern houses, we kind of do that. We drywall the outside, and we leave a 2x4 frame on the inside. So I'm now trying to find, how do you get down? There's obviously fences around so that it's safe. They have done a lot of reconstruction and restoration here. I wouldn't say necessarily an accessible location. It's literally just steps, but they did make some safety concerns because people would be falling down without that. But I'm wondering, how do I get down there? If you're Tunisian, let me know in the comments if you've ever heard of Uthina or you've been there. Or if you're not Tunisian, do you have any interest in visiting Tunisia? And if you do, go to my website, markivatravel.com. The link is in the description, and I'm trying to put together a trip to Tunisia. You can share your email to get on the list, and also tell me what your budget is. I want this trip to be a trip that you guys want to go on, not just something that I come up with. Give the video a like, subscribe, and let's get back to it. Yeah, while there's an entryway that way, it looks blocked off, but let's see if there's a way that they do let us in. It seems like there would be. So I thought this was the parking lot where I came in, but I'm realizing I came in all the way over there. So I think this has to do more with the entrance that we're about to find. Because if we look behind me, this is the entrance to the floor Imagine a gladiator entering through this archway. The roaring crowds, the fear, the adrenaline. Now that we're on the lower level, I can see that this is one path. I actually saw the above part. You probably can't see that down there. I might skip that, given that I'm the only one here, and that looks super sketch. But then the other place is going down. So this is an example where being the only one at a site goes from being very cool to being very sketchy. We're gonna explore in the subterranean depths. And you know, if you're watching this, everything was okay. This is very low, but there is some light. And, wow, okay. Okay. This is the subterranean part of the amphitheater. When you go to the Colosseum, it's really hard to see that, and it's very well controlled, let's say. It's a little less accessible here. Gonna have to go down a bit to get underneath, but this continues to be an incredible place. Okay. Wow, this is incredible. You can see how deeper in there, it would have gone to other preparation rooms, places for people to prepare to fight. It's closed off. There's support structures there, so it probably is not safe anyway, even if you could go in. Because when you're somewhere like here, you do want to make sure that it's actually shored up pretty well. I've been in some pretty sketchy caves that we found, and you're just crossing your fingers that nothing moves and you don't hit anything and the cave falls in your head. This is fascinating. And if you walked by this without a guide or without knowing about archaeology, you might just think, well, that's weird. Why is there a stone arch here but nothing inside? Well, what I would guess, because we have the stone arches further down that are kind of parallel. We have an arch over there, right across from this one, which is going into the stone face, is this, which looks to be full. So there's a few things that might be going on. As I mentioned earlier, what's interesting about this building is that it was subterranean, which is why it's preserved as well as it is. But the effect of that is likely this is the bedrock, and they couldn't dig any deeper for the bedrock, while the bedrock on this side goes lower. In fact, you can kind of see here what might be the bedrock. So this either is just rubble from construction, or slash it was closed off, or they built this and they just added this to keep the archway closed. And you might wonder, like, why'd they build an archway that doesn't go anywhere? Well, my answer to that are Romans like symmetry in a way that I don't think anyone's ever matched up to. They seem to just make things symmetrical for really no reason other than they wanted to. Because then when you look over here, this you see much more of the bedrock, some bigger stones, also looks like fill. Then on this side, nothing. They couldn't build an archway there because it was literally just bedrock. I'm sure if they wanted to, they could, but there was no reason to, and it was too difficult to. So what else can I see down here? You can tell this has all been pretty well restored, and it seems pretty safe to walk around. I wonder where this part goes. I went down the other way. Hopefully it's not too dark. Ah, yes. A staircase. There's something about seeing gates like that after just being in the subterranean part. I can almost hear the lines in my head. Super weird. Kind of sketching me out. I think one of the most interesting stories to tell about Uthina is the fact that it is empty. But they've actually spent a lot of work building infrastructure. I was in Dougga, which is the one that gets all the attention, but the infrastructure there was really lacking. Here, there's a huge visitor center with a cafeteria that's empty. There's walkways. You can see they spent money building infrastructure for tourism, but no one's here. And that's part of the reason why I'm here. I think it's part of our duty as archaeologists to showcase things like this, to explain not that it's just a good photo op, which it is, but it's also a fascinating story that you can learn so much from coming to, and that can be a highlight of a trip. So when you're sitting on your couch watching me, you see that and go, Oh, that sea looks amazing. I'd like to go there. And then when I tell you that it only took an hour from Tunis, Tunisia, it cost me about 10 US dollars. Tunis, Tunisia is safe, easy to get around to, and full of tourism infrastructure. And there's cheap flights from Europe. You sit there and go, wait, that seems cool. I want to do that. Leaving the amphitheater, I made my way further into the site to a collection of large mansions, specifically one called the House of Laberii. So while I think I'm the only visitor to the site, I'm definitely not the only one here. There is clearly the site guard. He has his dogs. Then there's the policeman who looks like patrols in an ATV. So that's good. So I did my dissertation research on northern Iraq, and a big part of what I had to do was wander around looking for archaeological sites. And kind of cool. Kind of makes you feel like Indiana Jones. But also sometimes it gets real sketchy. I've been chased by far too many dogs. By far too many, like 3 or 4. One is enough. Here we are, the next part of the site. This is the House of Laberii. Laberii. My Latin's not that good. So it basically is just a really ornate house with some amazing mosaics, some of which that are still in situ, in the ground, and some of which are in the Bardot Museum. So this is the massive house complex. In the middle over there, which we'll get to in a second, that was the courtyard. So because of these excavations, we can get a pretty good idea of what this house would have looked like and kind of walk our way through it. So this was probably the entrance, given the way it's lower, with the courtyard area over here. So because this is a massive estate with clearly a lot of wealth, the most important thing was the mosaics found here. The original discovery of mosaics here is what led to the initial collection at the Bardot Museum. So this was the central garden. You can see the plumbing infrastructure that went all the way around. So imagining what this would have been like. I'm in the portico, the covered area next to the actual garden, because over here would have been the rooms. So this would be one of the rooms. Walk into the doorway, which led into this smaller room over here, which still has some of the mosaics. Coming back to this main room, next to that small room, you could follow to see these mosaics that led to this other room, much higher quality. And there's something interesting about these mosaics. So while we see these beautiful flower motif with the decoration along the outside, there's also this. And this is on top of this. So what presumably happened is there was a later addition, and when they built a higher level of the mosaics, so when they excavated it, they left some of this and then exposed the bottom piece here. I don't know if this higher level was more ornate and they took it away, but what's weird is oftentimes, even if you're building these beautiful buildings, you still build on top of each other. You're not going to tear out the floor if you don't need to. Back in the portico, going into this room and then into this small hallway, pretty nice mosaic still, and we enter what might be, what we're seeing here is fascinating because it actually is about the building that we're in right now. It's meta. So over here, this is presumably the villa. And all of this is depicting the agricultural bounty, the farmland that supported the villa. This villa, the House Laberii. It was quite the flex to not only have a house this large that supported more than one family, but a lot of infrastructure, but to be able to spend the money to create these intricate designs. So we also see these columns around this mosaic. So I'll check this in the research and the excavation report, but likely this was also open to the sky, and that's why you have the columns there, even just to let light in. Because you'd want to let light in to highlight this beautiful mosaic. Little clear story windows at the top wouldn't do enough. And then off of that room is this other smaller room with most of the mosaics gone at this point. Back in the portico area, you could walk into this room, which would connect into this larger hallway down this way. Probably not a hallway actually, but this whole area was on the outside of the house, with columns like this. What's also obvious as you walk around is that the entire building, the floor was mosaics. So this is actually a reproduction of the one that is in the Bordeaux Museum. The mosaic depicts a famous scene from mythology where Dionysus, the god of wine, gives the gift of viticulture to King Icaros of Attica. In the center is the very young Dionysus without a beard and King Icaros, but surrounding it is this rich tapestry that represents all of the vines growing from the Cantharos pottery. The border of the mosaic, designed to be like a tapestry, is said to be one of the most beautiful in all of Africa. So you see this portico continues, and then it likely ended here, given this wall here. And if we go over here, see another example, much like in the amphitheater, of a fresco. The fresco that's still remaining here. So the whole walls all would have been plastered, painted in bright, bright colors. And this gives you an idea of what that could have looked like, what that would have looked like. And this was part of the water storage from the pipes that ran around the outside of the courtyard. So we're in the portico, and you can see because there's the wall on this side, but also the columns that were part of this wall that would have given the walkway around this area. So sometimes when you look at archaeological plans, it's kind of hard to figure out what the building was like, but this gives you a pretty good idea because you can just walk through the buildings and really experience what this was like as a really large house. Behind me is the capital, the temple district that was on a hill, and you can imagine how it would have felt when you were down here in the homes looking up at that much larger temple than it is now on top of that hill. How it was the center of the city's life, and it was a sign that the three main gods of Rome were the three main gods of here, because they are representative of the imperial power of Rome. And now it was time to climb up that hill to go to the temple complex, the capital. This is one of those things that feels really exotic if you've never seen it before. But when I was working at Iraq, this is what I was doing, just walking down dirt roads, and you would see these large herds of sheep kind of everywhere. The only thing to keep in mind is to make sure there's no shepherd dogs, because those dogs do not mess around. So it's definitely a long walk to get up to this hill, the capital, the temple complex. One of the cool things about going to sites like this and not just reading about them is phenomenology. That is the study of like what it feels to be there and helps you interpret things. Coming from the amphitheater all the way over there on a map, that's like, I don't know, 600 meters? But actually doing the walk, you get a scale of the city and what it would have been like to be in this pretty large Roman metropolis. So what I think all of this is, I bet when the French had excavations here, they built these dig houses. Yes, this is definitely the infrastructure that was built for excavations. This is pretty common in these large sites when they excavated back in the 1800s, is they didn't want to use like a tent or something, so they built houses. The temple complex was originally made up of 3 temples. In the middle was the Temple of Jupiter, the head of the Roman pantheon and the largest temple. On the right was a smaller temple to Juno, and on the left, another small temple to Mercury. So this is the capital. So those columns were not reconstructed, but they put them back together to give an idea of how tall the columns would have been originally, because the actual podium had largely fallen down. But the podium is in 2 parts. There's this lower level, lower chambers, and then there was the platform on top where the temples would have been built. So let's go up and look at the temple and then come back down here. So these are the reconstructed steps. This was where the steps originally were. They've long fallen into disrepair, but to give you an idea of this is all artificial construction. It was already on top of a pretty big hill. And then there would have been the other platform here. On your way up the steps to the Temple of Jupiter, the king of the universe, the head of the gods, ruler and look at all he owns. Unbelievable. This is why there was a podium on top of the hill, to give these views around and to make everyone know when they looked up at the temple, they must worship Jupiter and the imperial gods. It is gusting up here. You may not be able to tell, but you have to imagine, because it's so much windier on top of this hill, and they raised the hill even higher, that when the building was here, there'd be the whistling through different parts of the building. Maybe there's little slits that would give the sensation of you're hearing something special. And if you're the layperson, you're the rural farmer or the everyday man coming up to worship, you would hear these sounds and think the gods are telling you something. We so often forget that these buildings are not just by themselves, they're part of the environment, and we need to understand them in the context of the environment. So in this case, there is no more building, but the podium where the building was tells us a lot about how they probably controlled the population here. And I'll check that with the people that have actually done the research. Yes, there's a whole genre of objects called tintinnabulum, which are basically wind chimes that had some mystical meaning and are, well, you can see. So the scale of this podium is even more obvious when you see, well, the extension over there, but then also all the way down to one level, and you may be able to see that, another level down too. It might be hard to see, but over there, see if I zoom in, and all the way over there, that's Tunis. We are not far from Tunis. But even despite that, there's pretty much no one here. So you really get an idea of what the steps would have been like coming up here. The reconstructed ones are on the side, but the scale that it took not just to build it, but to actually come up to worship. So I live in Philadelphia, and I kind of think about this as like the Rocky Steps. It's not as tall as the Rocky Steps, but it would probably be just as hard to run up with those Roman sandals. And there's something about having the steps that not only gives you the temple a place of importance, but you have to lean down. You're already bowing as you go to worship. So this, they've clearly done some restoration to keep it solid so it doesn't fall down, but to give an idea of the scale of the rubble that was underneath the steps that were here. Now to go underneath the podium. They've kept some of what looks like was the secondary floor versus the original floor. So this would have been the original paving, I believe, in the 1st century, and this comes in the 2nd or 3rd century. All right, so that's the main way to get in. I'm not sure why I went through that crack in the wall. I thought that was a dark, scary door. It's just wood. It's just dark wood. So this room, as you may be able to tell on camera, is fully renovated, fully restored. It's cool. It gives an idea of what it would have been like, but this is definitely all new restoration. So this, I believe, is part of the painted walls. You can see the Latin there, as well as the faint outline of some of the paintings. You start to get an idea of the arches and the monumental stones and support, the foundation would be needed for this huge podium. We're still at what is the ground level versus the temple level above, but there's more below us. So this is an arch, which means there's another arch structure below this. We may or may not be able to get down in there, but we'll see. So it goes much deeper. So that's the basement. This is the 1st floor, and that's the 2nd floor, effectively. They had to build all of this structure to support the temple, a huge building. And this is the center of the city, the focal point, which was supposed to be impressive and imposing. But this doesn't seem like it's open to the public, probably for good reason. If this was a true archaeological site, I would see that and go, let's bring some more people around. You wouldn't go there by yourself. So maybe you actually can go into the lower levels. So that's the top floor, the podium of the temple. We were just down there in what I was calling level 1. Here's our subterranean level. Because this is built on a hill, I guess it makes sense. You need the different levels that go along with the hill slope. I'm really curious if, looking at this escarpment here, the cliffside, there's any signs of stratigraphy. So as an archaeologist, whenever you see a hillside, you think erosion. And erosion means uncovering, which means there's something underneath there. But you don't really see anything right here, and I guess this outside wall might actually have been the outside of that temple structure, with this over here, maybe. You can see some of the covering, plaster or stucco, on the outside of the wall there. And this, I'll be honest, I have no idea what this is. You see it from the front, the large rounded front where the temple would have been standing on top of the podium. It is even more imposing than you'd think, and the amount of stone and the superstructure that it took to keep this building up. Well, for here, let's give it a try. Walking into the subterranean level. Up there, if you were looking down, just to give you an idea of how big this podium is. All the things that could be stored underneath here. Let me point out something pretty cool. You can see the difference in architecture between these really large stone foundation pieces and some of the less important, but still important, smaller retaining walls that were used for the arches. Oh, this is creepy. So yeah, that is the ceiling above, which is the base of the podium. And so that's where I was before, way up there. So coming back out into the light, where I'm right now, before they reconstructed the podium, this was a secondary temple. There would have been a temple to Juno, right here, supplementing Jupiter on top. What makes this feel like it's a real archaeological site, like that I've worked on, is that you just have ruins. Ruined buildings all around. Are they Roman? Are they modern? You can't really tell. These are almost certainly Roman, but there's just buildings all along the landscape. And then you look out in the distance and see what I think are the olive oil trees. So this shows what would have been underneath that temple, the secondary temple. And you can get an idea of there were rooms underneath the main temple structure, much like that are in the podium over there. But this would have been the secondary temple, most likely. So the one more thing I want to see are the ruins of the baths. They're relatively close, and they seem like the most interesting combination of ruins and visible. Okay, guess we're gonna go look at the baths. So there it is. Right now I'm standing in the middle of what used to be the Roman baths that are completely in ruins. And again, I'm the only one here, and you just can feel like what it would have been like discovering the site as the French. Because of course they weren't discovering it because the Tunisians knew it was already here. So there's the collapsed concrete here, but then this part of the structure I think is still standing. Maybe they uncovered this in some excavations, but this is like the ruins you would see in the 1800s. Look, you have these basins, could have been used for washing your hands, and you see the structural part of this with all the concrete that kept it together. And the brick. The Romans used brick. This was probably part of the irrigation system. And I think this was part of the main, frigidarium, calidarium, the large domed arched space that probably would have collapsed with the floor here. I almost took a step down there, which is very deep. That is the cooling water heating system for the baths, and that is, I would have broken my leg. So that's the thing with exploring these sites, is it is a little dangerous. And here we have it. This feels more like I'm in Egypt than I'm in Tunisia, but I guess Egypt and Tunisia, not that far apart. So what's the purpose of coming to a large, abandoned, empty site like this? Well, other than learning about Rome, getting an idea of what it would have been like to live in a typical Roman city, it gives you an idea of how archaeologists actually take these ruins and learn about a civilization or learn about a place. And even more than that, I think places like this are part of the answer to over-tourism. While we don't want this place covered with tens of thousands of tourists. Lesser known sites that have a lot to teach are a way to lessen the pressure for sites that are overburdened. So even in Tunisia, where the tourism is not overburdened, Carthage has far more people than here. As Tunisia's tourism hopefully increases over time, by spreading out the tourists, we can help with over-tourism and make it more sustainable. My name's Marshall. If you're interested in trips to archaeological places, trips to Tunisia, anything like that, check out markivatravel.com. Subscribe, turn on notifications, like the video, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll be exploring even more interesting places.